All right, I got Dr. Jeffrey Gladden on the show today. He's a longevity doctor and the author of the book 100 is the New 30. Dr. Gladden, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Joel. It's great to be here.
Yeah, excited to dive into all aspects of root cause health and longevity with you. I wanted to ask you though, what got you into the longevity space? What was the switch for you that went from, yeah, I'm practicing medicine to then saying, whoa, actually, this is where I want to go?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, my background is interventional cardiology, right? So I did that for 25 years here in Dallas, and I love doing it. I built my own heart group. I had 10 offices, 12 doctors. We flew around in a little A36 Bonanza. Started cath labs. I co-founded a heart hospital here in Dallas that's become nationally recognized. Was involved with medical device companies and all kinds of stuff, right? So. But what happened to me is in my 50s, all of a sudden I'm putting on weight. I'm exhausted all the time. Like, even though I'm getting a couple of good nights sleep in a row, I'm still exhausted. And when I would come under stress or pressure, I would feel myself go over a cliff of depression, like go from anxiety to depression, kind of like, but not the kind of depression. It's like, well, I'll go for a run and I'll feel better. It was just like over a cliff. And my dad ended up dying with dementia, and I was starting to develop brain fog. And so I'm like, wow, this is all really concerning to me. So I went in and saw one of my colleagues and had, the test run that they run, the quote unquote comprehensive test that they run. And what I got back was, everything checks out for your age. You're just getting older. Why don't you take an antidepressant?
Wow.
And it was literally such an existential moment for me, right? It's like, oh my gosh, it's just going to all be downhill from here, right? What is this idea of aging gracefully, right? It basically means making peace with loss, is what it boils down to.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not ready for that. I don't want that. I don't want any part of that. And as I was growing up, my grandmother, my mom's mom, had always told me, Jeff, it's hell to get old. You don't ever want to get old. She would complain about this in her 70s or 80s. She ended up dying at like 90, 95. My grandfather died at 97. But but I heard that like my whole life, right? And so I'm like, no, I'm not going to do this. So that's when I kind of threw myself into the whole functional integrative age management medicine space, got some certifications. It took me 2.5 years, but I ended up cracking the code on everything that was going on with me, right? And so it was subclinical hypothyroidism, right? All my thyroid numbers were technically normal, only picked up with delayed reflexes, resting metabolic rate that showed I wasn't getting enough thyroid action in the cells. But it went beyond that because my genetics showed that I don't convert inactive thyroid to active thyroid in my brain efficiently. I don't change T4 to T3. And so I'm homozygous for that deficiency. So that's about a 60 to 80% reduction in my ability to do that. So when I got on the right combination of active T3 and inactive T4, because your body will convert it systemically, but not in the brain, they're two separate systems for thyroid. Then all of a sudden, it's like the lights came back on. I'm like, oh my gosh, I jumped out of bed again. It's like, and that was like within 2 days. So it was like, wow, this is exciting. And then, women go through menopause, men go through andropause. And I was low on testosterone at that point, DHEA, got those put on, lost, 20 pounds of fat, put on 10 pounds of muscle, weight what I did in college again. And then the anxiety and depression and the brain fog, I don't make certain neurotransmitters very efficiently. And I figured that out genetically as well. And it was beyond, MTHFR and things like that. I don't have Alzheimer's genes, but I have other genes that can tee me up for brain fog, dementia, things like that, like my father developed if I'm not careful. So learning what to do there from the standpoint of what supplements to take, what kind of foods to avoid, things that aggravate it, cleaning up my gut, then all of a sudden it was like, oh, wow, I think I feel literally great again. Like my kids can't keep up with me again, kind of great, right? And I'm like, man, I've been practicing sick care. Everything up until now has
Wow.
really been sick care. And so I left it all in 2012. I kind of base jumped literally out of it because I could no longer do it. I didn't want to have those conversations about, here's a med to take for your blood pressure. I wanted to really help people optimize their health. And then that's grown into Gladden Longevity. That was in 2012. So we've been at this for a few years. And, it's expanded into, really based on the fact that I'm eternally curious, it's expanded into almost anything you can imagine, right? So it's been really, really, really fun. Yeah.
That's so cool. And I love that because now you're the advocate for your patients because you know exactly what
That's
it was
right.
like to be on that side. And we were talking offline before we jumped on too. It's just so easy. And we see this And again, not that it's necessarily wrong, but it's just so easy for a lot of these functional medicine docs in the longevity space are just putting people on TRT like right away, right? And they're not looking
Yeah.
behind the hood and like what you were just talking about, genetics, neurotransmitters, what's going on in the gut. I love that. I wanted to ask you briefly before we jump into kind of if someone were to work with you, what it looks like. Because I'm kind of curious, like all the things that you just explained, like what are the things that you actually go through when you're looking at possibly working, if they're looking at working with you. But I wanted to ask you because I've never heard anybody talk about this. You said something about the thyroid,
Yeah.
and you mentioned that it doesn't get converted in the brain. What did you exactly mean by that? Because I thought the majority of T4 to T3 gets converted in the liver, and then 20% is in the gut, and then there's like the remainder from the thyroid itself will make T3. But what did you mean about actually getting into the brain? I've never heard anybody talk about that.
Yeah, so there's DIO1 and DIO2. DIO1 is the enzyme that takes an iodine off of T4 to make T3. We all know you need iodine for your thyroid, right? So you actually attach 4 atoms to the thyroid molecule and you take one off to activate it, so to speak. Well, it turns out DIO1 works systemically in your body, and that's what you measure when you get your blood drawn, is what your T3 and your free T3, and that's all systemic, right? But you're not measuring, you're not tapping into the brain, and the brain has a blood-brain barrier. It's a separate system, right? It isolates itself in many respects. And so if you're unable to convert T4 to T3 in the brain efficiently, then you end up with a deficit in the brain relative to the rest of the body. It's like a hidden compartment, and very few people know this, because you can even do a resting metabolic rate where you get the systemic metabolic rate, which is the gold standard test for thyroid, which we do for every client, to see where they stand. And we have many people that come in who are on thyroid, who are being managed on their thyroid, who are still hypothyroid, right? And we see it all the time. And then when you layer in the genetics and you actually fix not only the thyroid level systemically, but the kind of thyroid to where they're actually getting enough active thyroid in the brain, oh my gosh, it's like life changing. So yeah, so you really have to break it down in different compartments. Yeah.
That's so wild. Now, why aren't people getting that conversion in the brain? Is it just typically genetics, or do neurotoxins play a role too?
Typically genetics. Typically
Okay.
genetics are the main driver. Yeah,
Okay.
genetics seem to be the main driver. Yeah, and it's fascinating to me how few people actually test for this, right? They think that they're managing thyroid based on the blood work, and they're doing ratios and calculations. And when I left traditional medicine, where it was all about TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, right? If that was elevated and you had a problem, if it was normal, you were okay. Once you get past that, and then you start learning about all these different ratios and all the different things, and then you start to realize, oh my gosh, that's all a pile of wooey, because it's a resting metabolic rate that really tells a story. So
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
Wow. Okay,
Mhm.
someone's hearing this and they're feeling crummy. They're turned 50 just like you, and they say, "Dr. Gladden, I need your help. Where do I begin?" What are some of the comprehensive things? Because it sounds like you do a lot of really neat tests before
Yeah,
you concoct a plan for somebody.
right. Well, the first thing, I think the most important thing in longevity, just to take a little bit of a running start at the question here, is to actually understand what is longevity, right?
Mm,
What does that actually mean? What does it mean to the individual, right? So for me, there are lots of people that think, well, I just want to live a long time. Like if I could just be healthy for a long time, that would be great, right? But when I started to feel really good again in my 50s, I started to ask a question. Geez, I wonder how good I can be, right? How fit, how strong, how mentally sharp, right? And then that turned into, I wonder how relationally replete, how spiritually aligned, right? How good can life be, if you will? And so we really evolved into asking several questions. How good can we be? How do we make 100 the new 30? How do you actually do that? How do you live well beyond 120, crack the Hayflick limit, right? Telomere shortening. How do you get beyond that? How do you live young for a lifetime, right? In other words, be youthful for a lifetime. It's not about getting old and still being able to do stuff. It's about, I wake up 27 every day, right? 27 every day. And the next decade, I'll be 28, the next 29, and then I'll be 100, I'll be 30 when I'm 100. So, but the point is, when you reference a youthful age, like everybody listening to this, one of the biggest things you can do for yourself right this second is to pick an age, a physical age that you want to be for the rest of your life, right? You don't give up any of the wisdom, because I'm going to address that in a second, but pick the physical age you want to be for the rest of your life. Maybe it's 18, maybe it's 22, maybe it's 42, maybe it's whatever it is, 36. In my case, I picked 30, but I'm working on 18, to tell you the truth. But anyway, pick that age. And the reason that that is so incredibly powerful is because we have been coached that we're getting older. And if you say, well, yeah, I don't feel that great, but I'm 62, I'm 49, I'm 75, whatever age you are, and you identify with that chronological age, then you've already acquiesced to the aging process. But when you say, no, I'm 27, what do I need to do to be 27? In life, you only get the answers to the questions that you're asking. So if you're asking the question, how do I get back to 27? How do I get back to 26? All of a sudden, it will motivate you in ways that you don't acquiesce to the aging process. And you'll be stunned. You'll be stunned at the way it changes your life, actually. So that's one comment. The other is that when people come to see us, I talked a little bit about longevity having meaning, right? And so the fifth question that we're asking is, how do we actually develop a 300/3,000-year-old mind, right? How do you ascend into that transcendence, wisdom, perspective, calm, equanimity, right? How do you actually do that? And how do you elevate? If I see longevity really as an opportunity to elevate what it means to be a human on the planet, right? Now I have a youthful body and an expansive mind. I've moved beyond binary thinking, right? Somebody's right, somebody's wrong. Every conflict on the planet's, a function of that. Into quantum thinking, where it's like, oh, how do we find the best solution at this time and with these people in this place, right? And so it's more of a quantum computing kind of thinking. So, but it gives you the opportunity to elevate your experience of what it is to be human. And that's what really excites me about longevity, right? It's not about playing golf. I'm not really a golfer. I can play it, but it's not really about playing golf for 50 more years or 100 more years. It's like, how do I actually step into a new way of actually being beyond anything I've ever experienced? That's what gets me juiced.
Yeah,
So
you're talking about a complete change your paradigm, change your reality.
that's right.
I love that.
That's right. That's right. And so to accomplish that, I'm still answering your question. We've developed really 5 circles that need to be addressed. And the first one is what I would call life energy. I write about this pretty extensively in the book, the life energy circle. And it has to do with, things like, do you have a growth mindset, right? Which basically boils down to, are you married to your answers or are you married to your questions? So, we go through life thinking it's our job or our duty or even our aspiration to find our answers, right? And yet, all progress comes from questions, right? Answers all have a shelf life. And even an answer in a religious framework where it's like, well, this is what I believe, this is my answer. That's great. But it's the questions that are going to drive your advancement in that space. It's not being married to that particular answer. It's like, how do I be more of this? How do I be more loving, more caring, more whatever, right? So it's always about the questions. And so I think it's so important. Point number 2, if you're listening to this, you've picked your age. Now identify your questions, right? What questions am I asking, right? So that's one piece. And then there's things related to mental health, how we solve the traumas that we've all been exposed to, transcend those, become grateful, unconditional love for ourselves, feeling safe, which is massive, right? Because, so much anxiety, depression, PTSD, and then so much fear and anger and angst, right? So you have to solve all those things. When you do solve all that stuff, all of a sudden, the impact on your biology is dramatic. I was just at a conference and they were talking about a fact where, like a yogi, when they meditate, when they go into a deep alpha, but not even alpha, go to theta, go into a deep theta state, right? Which is a really deep meditation, which is very accessible, by the way, but go into that. Within the first 15 minutes, they have a 40% increase in the release of stem cells, endogenous stem cells, to help repair the body.
Wow.
Right? So when you can actually control your nervous system, right? How you feel, how you think, and all these kinds of things, and how you move through space, right? All of a sudden, youthfulness is so attainable. And I tell people that really there's one thing to focus on, right, in this whole process, and that's your nervous system, how you think, how you feel, what you feel about yourself, other people, the questions you're asking, and how you move through space, how fast, agile, strong, etc. can you be. So anyway, that's the first circle, is life energy. That's just a couple snippets. There's a lot in there. Then we go after longevity, which is really the root cause of the root cause. And this has to do with the hallmarks of aging. These are the biochemical processes that are really driving the accelerating current in the river, because aging is exponential. It's not linear, right? You're not in a lake, go sailing across the lake. You're on a river headed towards the falls, right? And the current gets stronger every year, and that's been shown over and over again. And yet we have a hard time relating to that. So, in other words, and if you don't think we do, then just do this. If you're listening to this, ask yourself, what am I going to be like in 20 years? Right? What am I going to be like in 20 years? For me, anyway, I think it's almost virtually impossible to feel like we're going to be any different than we are today. Right? Almost impossible. So we're in an exponential game. We can't feel it, even though we see it all around us. Right? Puts us at a massive disadvantage. Right? So you have to understand you're in an exponential game. So to get at the root cause of the root cause, which is the longevity, those are actually looking at the actual drivers of the current in the river. Right? So immunosenescence, right? Telomere shortening, senescent cell accumulation, inflammation, DNA methylation patterns, et cetera, right? So we can deconstruct all those. So now you're really getting leverage on that system, right? And then the next circle is health. All the organ systems, everything you're familiar with. And then the next system is performance. Like when I'm 100, I want to be fast, agile, strong, quick, balanced, great cardiovascular capacity, reserve, recovery, and flexibility. So if I'm going to do that at 100, well, then I need to do that today.
Yeah.
Right. I need to do that today. And then, so training for that, when you're 18, you go for a run and lift some weights, you're fine. But each decade, you've got to change the way you work out to actually keep the nervous system activated so you have great balance and things. It's just speaking at a conference, showing people how to walk figure eights forwards and backwards with their eyes closed, which is a massive proprioceptive activity, right? It's really, really fun. You can try that. It's another thing. If you're listening to this, just go try that. You'll see it's really, really cool. And you can get to where you're really fast and really fluent, right? Fluid and fluent in the whole thing. And the next thing you know, you'll be dancing like Fred Astaire. It's pretty cool, right? And then the fifth circle is one that I added, which has to do with the environments, right? Constructing the environments we reside in to support the mission. There's really four that we all live in: home, work, business, travel, vacation. And if we architect each one intentionally, so I know where my sneakers are, I know how I'm going to work out, I know what I'm going to eat, I know what I'm going to do whenever I go. I'm going to stay at a hotel that has a sauna or gym or whatever, so that you architect each environment to support the mission. Then all of a sudden it's easy to stay compliant, and the wheels don't come off when you go to Italy for 2 weeks, right? So it's that kind of a thing. So anyway, you put all that together, now you have an exponential solution for an exponential problem, right? And that's what's missing so much in so many clinics. They have practices and protocols and things they deliver, but they don't really have a well thought out system that actually enables you to turn back the clock, stay youthful, live young, and expand into the full expression of who you are here on planet Earth. So that's what we're all about.
I love that. Okay. Just like your book says, 100 is the new 30. For you, just in general, I know it's a tough question because you're not a general guy. You like to get into the nitty gritty, but I'm going to kind of put you in a box today. What are the top 3 biomarkers that actually prove someone's getting younger?
Well, I think I'll make it kind of simple for the audience. If you could run down the stairs, right? If you can run down the stairs, that's a pretty good biomarker that your nervous system is actually working pretty well. I find a lot of people as they age, they walk slower, they have more difficulty going down the stairs, they start holding the railing. If you can run down the stairs without holding on to anything, that's a pretty good natural biomarker. If you look at your skin and you see what the skin, when you pull up on the skin and tent the skin, how quickly it goes down, that's a pretty good biomarker, right? It gets slower as we lose collagen, right? So I'm trying to give you things you can do at home, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is, pick a strength test or a cardiovascular test. How many miles can you run, right? How many pull-ups can you do? What's your hand grip strength if you just jump onto a hand grip strength measurement device and do that? Just doing some simple things like that. There are even more simple tests, right? How many times can you sit down and stand up in a chair in a minute, right? That's a pretty good biomarker of strength. So those are things you can do at home. Now, here in the clinic, of course, we can measure many biomarkers of aging, right? And the reason it's really important to understand is that we talk about biological age, right? And I've really thrown out chronological age. I have literally no use for chronological age except to celebrate a birthday, right? So that'll be like, cool, okay, I just been around the sun another lap. That's cool. But apart from that, it really plays no role in my life. And then it's important to understand that the age you identify with is more powerful than any other age you have, whether it's chronological or biological, right? So being 27 is more powerful. And then when we deconstruct an individual here across the circles as I described, we end up measuring probably over 65 different biological ages. Right? You've got a heart age, a brain age, a blood vessel age, a heart age, bone age, right? A gut age. You've got telomeric age. You've got mitochondrial age, DNA methylation ages, right? You've got oncogenic potential. You've got many, many things that go into understanding where you are in terms of this aging process. And it's important to understand that you're only as young as your oldest age. When you deconstruct someone thoroughly, then you know, oh, here's the targets. Here's where we need to go, right? Here's the issue. Let's go after these. Let's start with this. And once we get you there, we pull you out of the fire. We pull you back this. Now let's start to optimize you, right? So this is the process. It's not just come in and do a cold plunge in a sauna. Now you've had a longevity therapy. You're good. Right? It's not. That's not how it
Not
works.
that simple.
Right? Yeah. It's like I drove my car into the gas station and put gas in and washed the windshield and I'm good to go. Versus no, let's deconstruct the thing and reconstruct it, make it better than it ever was. Right. So which is the better practice?
Yeah. For you, just curious, because you work with a lot of top performers, high performers, and that's one of their big goals is doing exactly what you're doing, reversing
That's right.
biological age.
That's right.
For you, either yourself included, or just what's one of the big daily habits that you see a lot of these guys or yourself that actually they do?
Yeah. My daily routine. A lot of people have in the practice of adopted some form of this, but my daily routine. I'm on thyroid, as I mentioned, so I get up and take my thyroid, take it on an empty stomach. Then I sit down and I journal. Right, I journal in a gratitude journal. Right, and I put down things that I'm grateful for. I put down things that would make today great, and then I have some affirmations about myself that I put down. How I'm going to show up today, right? And I find that incredibly sort of centering. And then, depending on how much time I have, I'll meditate after that as well. I'll put on a device called a brain tap that actually can put me into a meditative state almost instantly. It's photobiomodulation and binaural beats, so you're hearing different frequencies in each ear, and you have some flashing lights in your eyes and through your ears, and it basically entrains your brain to go into whatever state you pick. So you can go to theta, you can go to alpha, you can put yourself to sleep in delta. And so using that device enables me to get a nice meditation, like 11 minutes. And then from there, I put my sneakers on and go exercise, right? And I don't exercise 5 days a week or 3 days a week. I do something 7 days a week, because if you have to decide if today's the day, right, then the failure rate's 100%. So you have to take the decision out. It's like, no, I'm going to do something every single day. It could be balance training. It could be weight resistance training. It could be cardio. It could be mountain biking. It could be going for a run. It could be jumping on my elliptical. And every chance I get to get outside, I take, because it's impossible to actually get in shape in a gym. It's impossible to get in shape if you're only going to a gym. And the flip side of the coin is it's impossible to get in shape if you don't go to a gym. But what I mean by that is you want to be challenging your nervous system in the outside, where you've got to jump over the rock. You've got to feel the wind, you got to push into that. You really want to be stimulating and activating your nervous system every opportunity you have. It's one of the reasons I love to mountain bike so much. You're constantly in a flow state with it. And that's a beautiful way to have fun, right? So you should have fun while you're exercising. If I go to a gym, it's just to build up some strength so I can go have fun with it, right? So that's the idea.
The
So that's
key is to
kind of
have a movement practice. It's not necessarily to
yeah,
be 3 days of strength training and 2 days for VO2 max, because you hear these numbers being tossed around a lot in the longevity space, right? Oh, VO2 max is really important,
it is. It
right?
is important. It is
Yeah.
important.
Do you
It's the
structure your 7 days of the week? Do you try to structure it where you do make sure you get a longer uh,
yeah,
cardio run per se, like
yeah,
you're activating that type 2
yeah. There's a lot
pathway?
of
Yeah.
there's a lot of misinformation about VO2, and we've been measuring VO2 for over 20 years and training it, right? So we measure it on every client multiple times. So we actually know how to build VO2. Everybody's talking about zone two. Um, I can tell you, zone two works if you're an athlete and you're overtraining. If you drop down to zone two, you will actually get a boost in VO2 because you're overtraining. If somebody comes in and they're coming off the couch, zone two can also be important to kind of get them going.
Hmm.
But if you're pretty active and you actually really want to improve your VO2, zone two never does it. We've never seen zone two do anything,
Oh wow.
right? Anything. And the other thing that doesn't do it is, interval training like Orange Theory, or I'm doing circuit training with weights. I'm getting my cardio because my heart rate's up. Okay, great. Let's measure it. Their VO2s go down
Wow.
universally. Yeah, VO2s go down. The way you build cardio, the way you build VO2 is kind of like Eliud Kipchoge, right? The guy that broke the 2 hour barrier in the marathon a few years back. Remember, he had that stage race in Austria. Had some guys running in front of him, wore special shoes, perfect day, cool, 40 degrees, whatever. But he broke the 2 hour barrier for the distance, right? And the way those guys train is they will run 5 hours at like a 9 or 10 minute mile pace, right? Just to build the base. So so we think for most people that's more like zone three. So doing protracted cardio at zone three, half hour, 45 minutes, an hour of that, a few days a week is really, you don't want to overtrain, but you're really building your base. And then a couple days a week, Kipchoge and those guys, they're running race pace, right? And they run a marathon, their mile pace is 4:30, right? For a mile. They do that 26 times. I mean, it's crazy, right? It's
Incredible.
crazy what
Yeah.
they do, what they're capable of, right? Just ridiculous, right? I couldn't run that fast for probably a quarter of a mile, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
right. But the point is that then you want to be pushing yourself. You want to be in zone five, right? Zone four is stressful, but you're not really getting the true benefits of zone five. So, um, so interval training for 20 minutes, 22 minutes, something like that, where you're getting in 6, 8 sprints for, a minute, 60 seconds, 30 seconds, 90 seconds, somewhere in there. You pick your time for the sprints and then about 90 seconds to recover in between. And when you go really hard, the thing I love about mountain biking is it's natural interval training and natural protracted riding, right? So anyway, if you do that, everybody that does that, they come in, their VO2s go up. They all go up. Anaerobic threshold goes up, right? Which is a measure of how in shape you are, right? And so we've seen that. And I came into this like, sure, I don't know how this works, but after 20 years, we've seen it over and over and over and over and over again. Somebody says, well, I quit doing my cardio because I started doing Orange Theory. Or I was hearing about zone two, so I started doing a lot of zone two. Great, let's measure it. All go down, 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 down. Every single one. And so I wish it was otherwise, but it's not. So, and VO2 is important, right? So we love VO2. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Cool. I mean, I'm glad you solidified that too, because I know I've recently seen some articles on X saying, "Well, I don't know if VO2 is the best, is as crocked up as what we believed it to be." But even strength training, right? I think that's pretty massive because we know that I think there's some
Yeah.
good stats out there that when people enter their 70s and if they break a hip, they pretty much die. So
Yeah.
we want to have really strong bones, right?
Yeah. You want to have strong bones and you want to have strong muscles, but what you really want is a nervous system because when you start lifting a weight, the first thing that gets strong is the nervous system. The nerves to those muscles start firing more vigorously. The first thing to get strong is the nerve, not the muscle. The muscles come along for the ride, right? Ask any stroke patient, right? There's no nerve, there's nothing happening. So it's really about strengthening the nervous system. And if you're just putting on muscle, but you're not getting your nervous system to be balanced in a sense of you break a hip because you fall, right? Well, what if you had a nervous system that you were so balanced that when you got hit, you didn't fall, right? You
Mhm.
caught yourself. Or if you did fall, you rolled because instead of sticking your hand out and catching yourself and breaking your collarbone, it's the nervous system that protects you, not the muscle. The muscle is important, But I'll tell you why you get myopenia, sarcopenia, right? Is because it's the nerve into the muscle bundle that actually starts to die out. That's why the muscle,
Mm.
that's why you get sarcopenia. It's all about the nervous system. And so if you go into the gym saying, okay, I want to challenge my nervous system, you realize that if you're on a machine and you're doing the same thing every time, that's not much challenge for the nervous system. Free weights are better, right? Things where you're standing on a balance board while you're trying to do stuff, or kneeling on a
Mhm.
Swiss ball and you're doing stuff. Right now, you're challenging your nervous system. So rethink your resistance training into, I'm challenging my nervous system training, and you'll get a lot more out of it, quite honestly. And understand this: Clotho is a protein that keeps your brain healthy, your heart healthy, your kidneys healthy, and you live longer. And you raise Clotho with cardio and you lower it with resistance training.
Wow. Okay. It's so interesting that you're talking about the nervous system today, and you've mentioned it quite a few times.
Yeah,
Um, have you ever connected with Garrett Salpeter from
I
NewFit?
have.
He's out in Texas in Austin, and he does a lot with the DC electric current. But
Yeah,
have you
we are familiar. Yeah, we do. We use different devices, right?
Yeah,
So
you guys should connect. I'll have to connect you if you want, but so it's just interesting because that's the whole premise: is the nervous system runs everything. So if
it
everything runs,
runs everything. It
right?
runs everything. If
Yeah.
you're only going to focus on one thing, focus on your nervous system and all the different manifestations of that. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because there's been a lot of people that have come on here talking about longevity. You're the only one that's really made it a point. That's why I picked up. I'm like, this is like the 10th time you said nervous system. So if anybody's not picking up
Mhm.
on that, it's like, interesting.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to ask you though about testosterone optimization because this is a
Sure.
big thing that a lot of guys start to face in their. I mean, now we're seeing in their 20s. It's pretty ridiculous. But I'm always, in the functional medicine space, you see a lot of hormone optimization, testosterone for men being obviously one of them. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think, I mean, I'm 43, I'm not taking any of that right now, but what about when I'm in my 70s? Should it be something that I consider to live a youthful, vibrant, amazing life?
Well, I think we live in a toxic environment, right? There's a lot of hormone disruptors in our world that weren't here, 100 years ago. All the plastics and all the things we're exposed to, right? A lot of hormone disruptors, which is why sperm counts are going down, why testosterone levels are going down in younger people. A lot of phytoestrogens that can disrupt things for men and women. Um, and so I think looking at your environment, if your testosterone is low, and let's say you're at a younger chronological age, I would start to look at your environment pretty hard, right? And you can just go into Chat GPT and ask it, what are the most common biohormone disruptors that might be in my environment? I live in wherever you live, and this is the kind of work I do, and here's where I work. And it'll basically spit out a list. Here's the top 10 things you should look at, right? And then think about that, right? Because getting stuff out becomes as important as what you put in, right? Everybody wants to know, well, what should I take? What should I do? Okay, well, let's start with what's in there. What maybe if we get it out allows your system to work properly, right? So that's a piece that's missed all the time too. But I would start with that. Then you can look at different supplements and things that will improve testosterone. Zinc is really good. Tonkat Alley. There's a bunch of them out there. Um, and that can be helpful. We know that resistance training will boost testosterone. Exercise in general will boost testosterone. Blood flow restriction exercise will definitely boost growth hormone release and testosterone, right? Where you put bands around your muscles and kind of constrict them. So it's almost like exercising with a mild tourniquet on. And that's will really boost hormones as well. But you are going to get to a point, it's the Leydig cells in the testes that actually are producing the testosterone. And just like ovaries don't last a lifetime, those Leydig cells are programmed not to last a lifetime either. So you will get to a point where testosterone starts to drop off, just like for a woman, hormone production stops when the ovaries stop working, right? So it's kind of in parallel, not exactly synced up in the timeline, but but kind of in parallel. And what's really important is to understand that you can't stay youthful without hormones. So either you get the Leydig cells to produce more, like using HCG, right, which is a human chorionic gonadotropin that basically you inject it. It'll cause the Leydig cells to push out more testosterone. giving it supplements and things like that, removing the things that are inhibiting it in the first place, doing the exercises that build it, all of a sudden, if you're in your 30s, early 40s, you can probably get to the testosterone levels you want and deserve, if you will, just doing those things. But then you get to a point where you probably do need to, at this point in time, until we can really kind of rejuvenate the Leydig cells, and there's work being done on that, right? Certain kinds of stem cells may have a shot at that. We're not doing testicular transplants, but in today, if you're in your 80s, you probably are going to take testosterone, and then it becomes a question of how do you do that safely, right?
Is there any downside though, in your opinion? Just, and I mean, this is kind of what I'm thinking, because, you know, it's interesting, this longevity space, which I love and admire. And I think, like you said, I like to do everything natural as much as possible. But then there's also this part of me that says, well, we were meant to, age and eventually die, and things naturally go down. But what if we exogenously correct that? Is that
Yeah.
messing with Mother Nature's, clock? Or, I mean, is there any downside to say men in their 70s with TRT or testosterone the same as a 30-year-old? Any downside that you've seen in the research? Just curious. I don't know.
Yeah, it's got to be done properly. I think testosterone replacement isn't done particularly well. There's a lot of T clinics out there that, oh, your testosterone's low, let's put you on testosterone. Now you're coming to us for an injection right now. They basically have a captive audience, and we'll inject you once a week. Well, that's a pretty big spike early in the week and a pretty low nadir at the end of the week, right? So if we're going to inject it, we do it twice a week, every 3 to 4 days, to kind of even it out. Then the other thing is, it's like, oh, well, your estrogen level's gone up. Let's put you on an anastrozole to block your conversion of testosterone to estrogen, right? Because in every human, male or female, testosterone becomes estrogen, right? It's just women convert it more efficiently, if you will, through an aromatase enzyme. And you can block that enzyme with lots of different things, saw palmetto, anastrozole, which is a drug, etc. And now all of a sudden you have more testosterone. And men think that that's a good thing. The clinics think that's a good thing. But in actual fact, men need estrogen as much as women need estrogen. Estrogen is massively important for your brain health, massively, especially if you have ApoE4 genes where you're prone to Alzheimer's disease. You need estrogen big time, right? You also need estrogen for cardiovascular health. You also need estrogen for bone density, right? We think testosterone is building bone. You need estrogen to help build bone too, right? Big stimulus for bone density, which is why a lot of women develop osteoporosis when they lose their estrogen, right? So point is, men need estrogen and women need testosterone. So a lot of hormone replacement is done poorly both for men and women. So if you have testosterone, you want to make sure you have plenty of estrogen. You don't want to have so much estrogen that your chest is getting large or something, but that's really quite rare. But you want to have a good estrogen level, 40, 50, that's fine, quite honestly. It's really super healthy. And then you keep your testosterone up. Well, okay, well, how are you metabolizing your testosterone to get it out of your system? That's really important. Nobody looks at that, but it's in the urine metabolites that you find, oh, I've got too much, 4-hydroxyestrone here, right, which is increasing my risk of prostate cancer. I've got too much 16-hydroxy. I can't methylate well and get it out through the 2-hydroxy, through the COMT gene to get it out of my system, right, through the methyl group. So when you actually deconstruct the biochemistry and you can start to manage these pathways, you can do hormone replacement therapy very safely. But if it's done poorly, to your question, you can put yourself at risk. You can put yourself at risk for prostate cancer. You can put yourself at risk for dementia, for lots of other things if you don't do it well. So it's really important to work with somebody that understands the entire system and then understands your genetics about what you're prone to, right? Maybe you've got a gene where prostate cancer is a higher risk for you if you're exposed to too much testosterone or androgens, right? Well, that's important to know about, right? And that's not checked. So it's not a one size fits all. You really want to, we're all Ferraris, really. We're all F1 cars, and they're both delicate and incredibly capable. But you've got to actually understand them to get them to run right. So that's how I think about it.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for going into that detail, because It's so easy, and it's just we're all jumping on the bandwagon. It's such a the rage now is TRT, and I think there's just so much more to it, like you said. So thanks for that,
Yeah.
just thoughtful answer. Um, I'm looking up at the time, and I know you have to run to another call pretty soon. Want to wrap things up with you, but any exciting projects that you can share with us, just upcoming that you're looking forward to, you can kind of tell us about?
Yeah. So I think most people have heard about DNA methylation, right? So these are little carbons with hydrogen that get attached to the DNA or unattached from the DNA. And basically, what they're doing is they're coordinating which parts of the DNA are going to be exposed so they can be transcribed. It's in other words, if you have a gene for a particular protein and a methyl group comes onto it, it can shut that gene down to where it's not transcribed, so that protein's not being made, right? Likewise, it can come in and you can remove that methyl group and it might do the opposite, or it might allow that protein to be made, right? So as we go through life, the pattern of these methyl groups and their attachment to the DNA tracks aging, if you will. And so this is where some of the original biological clocks came from. What we're learning now that's super interesting is that not only are there methylation patterns, but there's increased randomness that occurs in the expression of those genes as we age. So there can be a pattern to where this gene is being modulated down. And in a youthful person, if that were to happen, it'll just be modulated down into a particular, narrow parameter of this much proteins being made. As we age, there's less control. There's more entropy, right? Entropy is increased randomness. And so you could have wider swings rather, in terms of how much that protein is being made with that methyl group in place. And so it's referred to as increased DNA and increased DNA methylation entropy, right? And there's a new test out there that can measure that called a systems test. And I'm excited because we're getting a hold of that to be able to measure it. And the reason I'm excited about it is because it's something that we can address and we can measure the improvement. And you address it with plasmapheresis, which is basically where you take out old plasma from an individual, throw it away, and replace it with saline and albumin. This is based on the parabiosis studies that were done where you take a young mouse and old mouse, tie them together, circulations together, and show the old mouse gets young and the young mouse gets old, right?
Wow.
We've had trouble with getting young plasma because nobody wants to receive young plasma from a vaccinated donor, and all the kids have been vaccinated. You can only get it from people under 25. So
Yeah.
in lieu of that, using saline and albumin is good. And it's been shown that if you repeat plasmapheresis, you can actually start to reset somebody into a youthful biological process, not just kind of clean them out like do an oil change, but I mean, get the whole machine to run at a different level. And there's molecules coming that once you do that, you can set those molecules in play and sustain that for longer periods of time, right? So super excited about this kind of stuff. We just have come across something to really improve cardiovascular disease, sexual function, super important, right? So there's what you want is you want a lot of nitric oxide, but you've got to have an artery that's basically sensitive to nitric oxide, has the ability to make it, has the ability to respond to it, and that comes from having what's called a healthy glycocalyx. So your artery, think of it like a garden hose, right? So you got an outlining cover, if you will. That's the adventitia. It's tough, it's strong, so you don't cut it when you run over it with a lawnmower. Then inside there is another part of the hose, right? That's in our arteries, it's a muscle that allows the artery to dilate or constrict so it can expand or contract. And then inside that is a skin, right? Just like on a hose to make it friction free for the water to run through the hose, right? Well, in the arteries, you've got a skin inside that to make it friction free for the blood to flow, but it's a little different because on that skin is a fuzz. I'll just call it a fuzz. It's called a glycocalyx. And it's made out of proteoglycans and glycoproteins. There's heparin in there, has a negative charge. It repels things to keep them from diving into the artery and causing cholesterol buildup and things like that. But that fuzz also acts like a sensor so that when blood's flowing over that, if the blood flow increases, it's like, oh, we need more nitric oxide so we can dilate. So it's almost like a sensor saying, oh, this guy's exercising, blood's flowing. It'll cause the skin that sits on to make nitric oxide and dilate the artery. So for sexual function, and for every function, having a healthy glycocalyx is really the absolute gold standard for keeping your arteries healthy. You avoid atherosclerosis, you avoid high blood pressure, you improve sexual function, right? So having a healthy glycocalyx is key. So we now have a device in the office where we can actually look at the glycocalyx under your tongue, called a glycocheck with a scope, right? Which is very
Wow.
cool. We can measure it. We can measure it other ways too, with a cardiopulmonary exercise test and some other things that we do. But the point is, then you start using some of the supplements that can actually rebuild the glycocalyx. Well, what destroys the glycocalyx? Well, sugar destroys it. Destroys it big time, right? So every time you have a Big Mac, fries, and Coke, you've just wasted your glycocalyx, and it doesn't come back for about 7 or 8 hours, right? Smoking will destroy it, right? That's why one of the reasons smoking is so bad. But you can build it back in a matter of minutes, taking some of these supplements, right? Like Revasca. We have one called Glyco Restore. Comes from a company called Arterosil that makes it. And these are really either come from algae or from other plants that have the ability to actually regrow the glycocalyx. And it's really, really cool. So
Wow.
if you're struggling with high blood pressure, you want to have better sexual function or whatever, if you take these, you will start giving yourself the ability to make nitric oxide. And then if you really want to make nitric oxide, you got to be eating plants that are high in dietary nitrate to give you the fuel to make that nitric oxide. So you've got healthy glycocalyx. You're eating your kale, your arugula, your beets, things like that. That's great. Okay, now we'll drop an N101 in to tell my body to make nitric oxide. Now, if I still need help, I'll take Cialis or Viagra, which helps me hang on to nitric oxide so I don't tear it up and destroy it. Now, the next thing you know, party like a rock star, and right. So there you go.
Love that. That was so good. That's exciting stuff, man. Thanks for going into that. I could talk to you for hours. I know you got to run. You have another appointment. Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, tell everybody where they can find you if they want to connect with you. I know you have a podcast. You've got the book. Yeah, let people know where's the best place to reach you.
Sure. So the book is 100 is the New 30, how playing the symphony of longevity will enable us to live young for a lifetime. And it's 450 pages. It's on Audible as well. I read the entire book. If you enjoy Audible, we have a podcast called the Gladden Longevity Podcast. We have over 200 episodes. We go into detail on a lot of these topics with really interesting people from around the world, quite honestly. So that's great. And then we have GladdenLongevity.com, right, which is where you can get a hold of our supplement shop. You can also, if you're interested to work with us, you can reach out and we can have a free 15, 20-minute conversation with you to see if that's a good fit, see if we can help you. And it's our greatest joy in life is really to see our clients do well. So it's a beautiful life. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Glad that love what you're doing, and the source that the force that you are out there teaching this. It's such a blessing. So Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, thank you again, brother, for being on the show. Appreciate you.
Joel, such a pleasure. Really, really a pleasure. Thank you.